Hi everybody, this is Jeremy Siskind. I'm the author of Playing Solo Jazz Piano, as well as 2 volumes of the Jazz Piano Fundamentals series. And I wanted to brainstorm a little bit with you on something I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is how to improvise on a constant chord. And probably the most famous example of this is the Miles Davis tune, So What? Where you're in D minor for 16 bars, then E flat minor for 8 bars, and D minor for another 8. And there's not a lot of chord movement. Now, there are a lot of ways to teach and learn. We could be sitting here talking about motivic development. We could be talking about creating small cadences or, stuff like that. But I guess I wanted to talk about one simple method of sounding better and more focused on So What. And that is taking our mode and dividing it into different sorts of entities, different sorts of subdivision, different cross sections of the mode. And so I want to show you some different ways that we can go about doing that, as well as some ways that we can use these tools to play outside of the mode without sounding like you're just totally playing randomly. So let's dive in. So the first thing that we can certainly do is subdivide the mode into triads. Okay, so instead of thinking of, D Dorian, I've got 7 notes. In my experience listening to students play, that does not usually yield really good results. So one way that we get better results is by using triads. And one way you could think about this is that these are going to be upper structures, if you want to use that fancy term. These are going to be chords contained within the D Dorian mode. So for instance, we could take E minor, triad, F major, G major, A minor. We'll skip B diminished because it's going to be a little bit filled with conflict. And so there's definitely a few different ways that you can use this information. You could stick to one triad for a little while. Right, that's just the E minor triad. It sounds so much better than if I'm playing all the notes of the scale, right? You're getting a preview of the lecture, but I'm just going... What else could you do? You could mix between 2 different triads. And so here I'm not suggesting that you just use all 6 notes, but you play the notes of one triad, then you play the notes of another. In a sense, now I'm creating a E minor 7 chord or a G6 chord between those 4 notes, right? I was using the notes of E minor and then G major. If I put them together, I end up with this kind of 7th chord. But I could choose things that conflict more, like E minor and F major. It's definitely worth noting that Miles Davis clearly did this in his solo. If you listen to his solo on So What, you'll definitely hear him using these triads. One thing that you can do that I didn't demonstrate is you could add neighbor tones to the triads. I should demonstrate that real quick. Instead of just playing, you could play or... This is so much nicer than if I'm using all the notes of the scale. All right, you probably already spied, but you could also use seventh chords, just like we're using triads, but it gives you another kind of method of doing this. Notice as I'm improvising using these chords, I'm putting them in inversion. I'm flipping which note is on bottom, which note is on top. And each of these is going to color the mode in a different way. Like if I take C minor 7. Now it sounds a little bit more like Coltrane. Not that I sound like Coltrane. You know, that C major 7th, it's got that conflict in it, is going to feel a little bit different maybe than the A minor 7th. Weird thing happens to me that it gets harder for me, at least personally, to improvise using seventh chords than using triads. There's a certain focus that those triads give me. And again, absolutely feel free to combine. Now, I'm sure some of you are saying, well, aren't you just getting all the notes of the mode as you're doing that? And absolutely, you totally are. But there's a mental trick about compartmentalizing things. It makes it feel, to me, much more logical and much more directed. So much more clarity there. Now, these devices have been focused in chords built in thirds, but one other way that we could do this is we could think about tetra chords. And so tetra chords is this fancy word for any set of 4 notes within a mode. A lot of tetra chords are going to form seventh chords, but we could, for instance, use a different kind of tetra chord like F, G, A, C. That doesn't form any seventh chord. That forms this kind of 1, 2, 3, 5, or we could choose 4 notes that are in a row in the scale. So this is kind of another way around the problem. You could get as creative with tetra chords as you want. Maybe you want G, A, B, F. I guess that is technically 4 notes in a row, but I'm thinking about it differently. It could be... So tetra chords is a different way to think about this, where you're not just creating a seventh chord arpeggio. And then, of course, there's pentatonics. If you've studied jazz for a long time, you probably come into contact with pentatonics. These tend to give you maybe a more modern sound, and definitely they're super stereotypical of the 60s and 70s kind of modal sound. Now, what's interesting is that within any mode, you can find, without going outside of the mode, 3 different pentatonic scales, assuming it's a mode of the major scale. So in the D-Dorian mode, we could find F, G, and C pentatonic. Some of you might be wondering about minor pentatonics, but remember, minor pentatonics have the same sets of pitches as the major pentatonics. So you could also find 3 minor pentatonics, but they'll have the same pitches. So for instance, here, it's D minor, E minor, and A minor pentatonic. So either way, you get to a total of 3. And just like with our triads and seventh chords, you don't need to stick to the same pentatonic scale. Right, that's the very first one there. So let me show you what I'm doing. because it might sound like I'm just randomly playing at you. So what I'm trying to do is move between these different pentatonic scales. So there's the first one based on F major or D minor. And then I'm going to move to the next one based on G major or E minor. And then I could go to the next one based on... And of course, every pentatonic scale also has within it different triads, right? Within this first pentatonic scale, we can find F major and D minor triads. Within the next one, we have G major and E minor. So it's just some different ways to go about it. And then I wanted to think about these ways and talk about how they might influence ways we could choose to play out. And one way that we could go about it, there's many, many ways to go about playing outside of the chords, outside of the mode, but one way is that we could choose some of these devices, triads, seventh chords, tetra chords, pentatonics, with all but one note as part of the mode. So for instance, we could use an E major triad, okay? And so what I'm trying to say here is that the E and the B are part of the mode, but that G sharp, of course, is not. So if we're improvising on D minor, the good news is this won't sound totally foreign because 2 out of the 3 parts are part of the mode, but then 1 isn't. And what's more is that these notes hold together. Our ear can hear that they make a unit as a major triad, okay? And that means that our ear isn't going to reject it as complete BS and say, this person really sucks. They're going to say, oh, he's playing a major triad. That doesn't exactly fit the chords, but isn't that interesting? And maybe we could pair that with something that clearly is part of the chord, like an F major triad, right? That's clearly in that D minor mode. So again, everything but 1 is part of it, and it's creating a unit. Same thing, what if we used an F major 7 with a sharp 5? Right. So I think you guys can figure it out that F, A, and E are all part of the mode. The C sharp is the component that's going to cause conflict. And again, we could play that by itself, but it might be nice to pair it with something that's completely inside of the mode. So maybe we're going to choose an E minor 7. Okay, and now we have this feeling of, oh, it's pulling me out. Oh, it's back in. Oh, it's pulling me out. Oh, it's back in. Right? And then lastly, and I should have thought of this beforehand to figure something out, we could choose a pentatonic that is only slightly outside of the mode. Now, I'm looking at my keyboard, attempting to figure out one that's only 1 note out. I see D major pentatonic is only 1 note out, but that 1 note is the major third, so that's going to be pretty weird. So let's do this. This isn't exactly a traditional pentatonic scale, but it goes with that F augmented major 7 we just did, so we could use A. This is pretty close to an A major pentatonic. So we could choose this, which again just has 1 note outside of the mode. In this case, it's a C sharp. B flat major pentatonic would be one that only has 1 note outside of the mode. So we could mix that with one that is in the mode. with some interesting results. All right, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Since we were just talking about augmented chords, if you've watched the end, why don't you comment with the words augmented reality? And I'll see you around. I appreciate your likes and comments. I'll see you soon.